Imagine the dusty streets of Ravenna on a sweltering September afternoon in 476 AD. The air hangs heavy with the scent of decay. Abandoned markets where once vibrant traders haggled over silks from the east and grains from Africa now echo with silence. In the shadowed halls of the imperial palace, a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus, clad in faded purple robes that swallow his slight frame, trembles before a towering barbarian warlord. Odoacer, his eyes cold as the northern winds that carried his Germanic tribes across the Alps, demands the crown. The boy emperor, a mere puppet installed by his father, hands over the imperial insignia, the eagle-topped scepter, the diadem glittering with tarnished jewels. No grand ceremony, no legions marching in defiance, just a quiet surrender that echoes through the crumbling empire. This wasn't just the fall of a ruler, it was the day the Roman economy, once the beating heart of the world, finally crumbled into dust. But to understand this moment, we must journey back through centuries of ambition, greed, and unraveling threads that wove the greatest economic machine in ancient history into a tapestry of ruin. It all began in the golden haze of Rome's peak under emperors like Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, when the empire stretched from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Egypt. Picture the forum buzzing with life, merchants unloading amphorae of olive oil from Hispania, slaves hauling bolts of Egyptian linen, and bankers counting aurei, solid gold coins that symbolized unbreakable Roman might. The economy thrived on conquest. Each victory brought tributaries of wealth, slaves to till the fields, gold to fill the treasuries, and taxes that funded aqueducts snaking across the landscape like veins pumping life into cities. The Pax Romana, that era of relative peace from 27 BC to 180 AD, fostered trade routes safer than any before, with ships sailing the Mediterranean laden with wheat from North Africa, feeding Rome's million mouths. But beneath this prosperity lurked the seeds of destruction and over-reliance on expansion. When Trajan pushed the borders to their limit in 117 AD, conquering Dacia and its gold mines, it seemed eternal. Yet the empire had reached its zenith, and the cost of maintaining those vast frontiers began to gnaw at its core. Enter the subtle poison of currency debasement, a decision born of imperial desperation. It started small, with Emperor Nero in 64 AD, facing the aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome. To rebuild his lavish palaces and fund his excesses, Nero reduced the silver content in the denarius, the everyday coin that greased the wheels of commerce, from 4.5 grams of pure silver to about 3.4 grams, mixing in cheaper copper. At first, no one noticed. The coin still shone and trade hummed along. But emperors like Commodus in the late 2nd century amplified this trick, debasing further to pay for gladiatorial games and military donatives, bribes to keep the legions loyal. By the time of the Severan dynasty around 200 AD, the army had ballooned to over 400,000 men, demanding higher pay amid endless border skirmishes. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers, once proud guardians, grew mutinous, their loyalty bought with increasingly worthless coin. Inflation crept in like a thief in the night, prices rising as merchants demanded more denarii for the same loaf of bread or jug of wine. Families in Pompeii-like towns watched their savings evaporate, forcing them to barter goods instead of using money that lost value by the month. The real storm hit in 235 AD, igniting the crisis of the 3rd century, a whirlwind of chaos that nearly tore the empire apart. It began with the assassination of Emperor Severus Alexander by his own troops, disgruntled over pay and harsh discipline. What followed was a carousel of emperors, over 26 and 50 years, each rising on the promise of riches and falling to the sword. Civil wars ravaged the provinces. Generals like Maximinus Thrax seized power, only to be toppled in 238 AD during the year of the Six Emperors, a bloody farce where pretenders rose and fell like autumn leaves. Barbarian invasions compounded the horror, Goths pouring across the Danube, Alemanni raiding Gaul, and Sassanid Persians capturing Emperor Valerian in 260 AD, a humiliation that shattered Roman prestige. The empire fractured. The Gallic Empire broke away in the west, encompassing Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, while the Palmyrene Empire under Queen Zenobia claimed the east. Trade routes, once the lifeblood, became death traps. Pirates and raiders disrupted Mediterranean shipping, and overland caravans vanished amid the strife. Economically, it was apocalypse. Currency debasement accelerated wildly. By Emperor Galenius's reign in the 620s AD, the denarius contained a mere 0.5% silver, a bronze slug with a thin silver wash that peeled off in your hand. Hyperinflation exploded. Prices surged 1,000% across the empire, turning markets into madhouses where a single chicken cost what a farm once did. The Plague of Cyprian, raging from 249 to 262 AD, possibly smallpox, wiped out up to a third of the population, including entire legions and farming communities. Alexandria lost 62% of its people, fields lay fallow, and famine stalked the land. Peasants, crushed by taxes that emperors hiked to fund endless wars, fled to the countryside or sold themselves into serfdom to escape the collectors. Wealthy senators, overtaxed to curb their influence, hid their gold or emigrated, leaving cities like Rome depopulated and derelict. Military spending devoured 70% of the budget, with soldiers demanding gold solidi while civilians got debased trash. The human cost was heartbreaking. Imagine a Roman merchant in Antioch, once prosperous, now bartering scraps as his family starves, whispering curses at the distant throne. Amid this despair, glimmers of hope emerged, only to flicker out. Emperor Aurelian, ascending in 270 AD, was a whirlwind of reform. He crushed the breakaway empires, defeating Zenobia's forces in 272 AD and reclaiming Palmyra in a siege that left the city in ruins, then turning west to subdue the Gallic pretenders by 274 AD. Aurelian rebuilt walls around Rome, a 12-mile fortress that still stands today, symbolizing the shift from expansion to defense. He tried stabilizing the currency with a new Antoninian coin, but assassination cut his reign short in 275 AD. Then came Diocletian in 284 AD, ending the crisis with ruthless efficiency. Facing inflation's monster, he imposed price controls in 301 AD, the Edict on Maximum Prices, capping everything from wheat, 200 denarii per modius, to shoes, 120 denarii for soldiers' boots. But black markets flourished, and enforcement bred corruption, with inspectors extorting bribes. Diocletian divided the empire into the tetrarchy, 4 co-rulers to manage the sprawl, and tied workers to their jobs, binding colony peasants to the land like proto-serfs. It stabilized things temporarily, but at the cost of freedom. The economy became a rigid machine, stifling innovation and breeding resentment. Yet the wounds festered. By the 4th century, under Constantine and his successors, Christianity rose, but economic woes deepened. Climatic shifts, the end of the Roman warm period around 150 AD, gave way to cooler, wetter weather, ruining harvests and fueling migrations. The Huns' advance in the 370s AD pushed Goths across the Danube, leading to the disastrous Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where Emperor Valens perished along with 2/3 of his army. Refugees flooded in, straining resources. Emperor Theodosius I, the last to rule both East and West, died in 995 AD, splitting the empire between his inept sons Arcadius and Honorius. The West, poorer and more vulnerable, bore the brunt. Alaric the Visigoth, denied promised lands and pay, sacked Rome in 410 AD after a starvation siege that drove citizens to cannibalism. The Eternal City, once fed by African grain, now starved as Vandals under Genseric seized North Africa in 439 AD, capturing Carthage and its vast wheat fields. This loss slashed tax revenues by the equivalent of funding 40,000 soldiers, forcing hikes that broke the peasantry's back. Conflict escalated in the 5th century, a cascade of betrayals and invasions. Honorius, safe in Ravenna's marshes, watched as barbarians carved up his realm. The Rhine froze in 406 AD, allowing Vandals, Alans, and Suebi to cross into Gaul, pillaging as they went. Britannia was abandoned in 410 AD, its legions recalled to defend Italy, leaving locals to fend off Picts and Saxons. Aetius, the last great Roman general, held the line in the 430s to 450s AD, allying with Huns against Visigoths at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 AD, halting Attila's horde. But Aetius's murder in 454 AD by jealous Emperor Valentinian III sparked more chaos. The Vandals sacked Rome again in 455 AD, looting treasures accumulated over centuries, including the Temple of Jerusalem's spoils. Emperors became puppets of barbarian kingmakers like Ricimer, who installed and deposed at will, Avitas, Majorian, and Anthemius, all failing to reclaim lost lands. The turning point loomed as the economy gasped its last. Trade had collapsed. Mediterranean ships, once numbering thousands, now feared Vandal pirates. Cities shrank. Rome's population plummeted from 800,000 in its heyday to under 100,000 by 476 AD. Peasants tied to estates owned by tax-evading aristocrats toiled in a nascent feudal system, their labor yielding little for the state. Military reliance on foederati, barbarian mercenaries, backfired as they demanded land instead of pay, eroding Roman control. Odoacer, a Scyrian chieftain leading these federates, grew weary of empty promises from Orestes, Romulus Augustulus' father. In August 476 AD, mutiny erupted. Orestes was slain, and Odoacer marched on Ravenna. The young emperor's deposition was anticlimactic, no epic battle, just a barbarian king declaring the Western throne obsolete, sending the regalia to Constantinople's Eastern emperor Zeno as a gesture of nominal allegiance. In the aftermath, the fall resonated with deeper meaning. Rome's economy didn't crumble from one blow, but from 1,000 cuts, greed that debased trust in currency, overreach that stretched resources thin, plagues and invasions that shattered human spirits. Emperors, driven by short-term survival, sacrificed long-term stability, turning a dynamic market empire into a stagnant fortress. The consequences rippled through generations. Europe plunged into the Dark Ages, knowledge lost, cities forgotten. Yet in the ruins, lessons endure. Economies thrive on balance, not endless expansion. Corruption erodes from within like rust on iron. The boy emperor's surrender that day wasn't just an end, it was a warning etched in history's stone, reminding us how the mightiest can fall when wealth's foundations crack.